Trinity. There are some people who will tell you they have always known what they are supposed to be. They have a strong sense of call. I met quite a few of them in seminary, people who could pinpoint exactly when they knew they wanted to be ordained, when their call came, because it was through a dramatic vision of God, something like Isaiah's experience that we just heard, involving screaming seraphs and burning coals, or that of the disciples who quite literally had God wander up to them and say, "Hey." Some people said they had just known since they were children. They used to give communion to their teddy bears. Some had terrifying stories of surviving car crashes or shootings, only to feel afterward that their whole attitude to life had changed and they wanted to give it to God, their own version of a burning bush. In a way, I have long envied people who had such clarity of call, such certainty. Call was something with which I struggled for years. And I was so terrified of preaching that for many years I stubbornly ignored a growing pull to be a priest. But sadly, I never had God talk to me from a burning bush, or any other plant for that matter. And while I don't doubt any of my fellow seminarians' spectacular call stories or their experiences, I do sometimes think that big, dramatic call stories can cause trouble. While the good news in them is the reminder that God tends to take us apart before putting us back together, see pretty much everyone to whom God appeared dramatically breaking down in fear. But the very real downside is that they set our expectations for a call way too high. If it doesn't involve screaming seraphs and smoke, or at least a sinking boat, it cannot be from God. I realize that talking about call may not be something most people spend a lot of time angsting over. It seems too churchy. Surely it only applies to those who want to be deacons or priests. But call, put another way, is simply the question of, what am I to do with my life? What is my purpose here on earth? What gives us and our lives meaning? That is a struggle I would guess pretty much all of us have experienced. And right now, I am hearing from a lot of people calling to ask me what I think they should do right now. Feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of the world's pain and terror and wanting to jump in and help, to do something. They ask me to help them figure out exactly what God wants them to do and when and how God is going to telegraph it to them. And while with God nothing is impossible, my first line of advice is, don't wait for a bush to start a conversation. My first line of advice is to look inside. Look at who you are. What are you doing with your life? What gives you joy? What takes the life right out of you? Where in your life do you think you are doing something, being someone that is of God, that is, brings more light and more life to the world? I would guess many of us, at best, half believe we are doing what God has called us to do. Half believe we are living a life of purpose. Many of us seem to spend a life waiting to find out what our true purpose is, or waiting until our circumstances improve and we can do a better job of fulfilling it. You know how it goes. Once I get through school, once I have a little more experience, once I get the perfect job, once the mortgage is paid off, once I retire. And the only thing we know for sure is that for now, in the meantime, this cannot possibly be what God had in mind. As sad as that is, it does provide a function. It helps us avoid jumping into life with both feet. Because if this is not my real life, if it hasn't started yet, why give it my all? I can stay in the shallow end doing the doggy paddle. If anyone asks me what I'm doing, my confident response is that I am practicing. And further, it lets me dismiss who I am, discount what I do every day, because it doesn't live up to some fantasy of what I would look like if dedicated to my true purpose. Deep down, I suspect true purpose is something we each believe we have. For a long time, the church was in the business of helping people figure out what their true purpose was. We haven't been so great at that for a while. It's really not any one person's fault. We've gone through long stretches of time where we really got off track, felt that purpose must involve conquering the world under the flag of Christ, or fighting to keep Christ in Christmas, defined not by serving the last and the least, but by making sure we can get a red cup at Starbucks in December. And many Christian churches, faced with people trying to figure out their purpose, will direct them to a committee, or invite them to sing in the choir or to volunteer at the food cupboard. And while all of these things are great, thank you, choir, and necessary, they seem to not really address the question, right? But before we all start trying to diagnose the problem in the system, find out who's responsible, and create a committee to fix it, the truth is that discovery of purpose is not the job of any one person or committee. It is the job of the gathered community of faith. In other words, all y'all. It is the job of the called ones. And before you start looking around for those with burning embers on their lips, remember that each of you is, in fact, called to live out of your deep identity as a child of God, whether that call is as a plumber, a nurse, an executive, or a welder. I have a strong hunch that God is not really at all interested in how we make a living, provided the way we make that living does not denigrate others. But that God is wildly interested in what we do and how we are. Because the truth is, you can be the hands and heart of God. You can be Christ for someone, whether you are in high school trying to figure out which college you're going to go to, or the chair of a department at an Ivy League university. You can be living out Christ's call whether you are marching in a protest against the denigration of trans people or the separation of brown families, or making a meal for people at the shelter, or sending money to organizations doing justice work, or praying an hour daily for the world's deep needs. The plain truth is, you already have everything you need to respond to your divine call. You have the same thing every blessed person has, a whole life to live on this earth. Tasks in it you can do well or not so well, and people in it you can lift up by your presence or pull down by your absence, even when you're standing right in front of them. The question of call is not so much what you are doing, but who you are and how you are living. The question of purpose has less to do with a career choice than with what is at the center of your life, and to what are you giving your life. Paul was a tent maker, and he remained one after he became an apostle. But none of us remember Paul for his wicked good tent-making skills or try to emulate his tent-making ability. We remember Paul because there is more life in the world because of him, because of who he was and how he was. When each of us goes to bed at night, the question of call is simply this: is there more life in the world because of us, or less life because of us? The question is the same for those who have had burning embers applied to their lips and those who have not, those who have chatted with flaming foliage and those who have not. Our purpose, our God-given purpose, is the same. It is to increase the abundance of life in this world. And I want to add, no one of us can fix anything that is wrong in the world right now. We cannot be responsible for the life of the entire world. I cannot fix racism. You cannot fix a deep lack of caring for our neighbors. We just can't. But we can, in our own life and with what we have been given, be in the world with grace and love and empathy and mercy. We can increase the abundance of life in our part of the world. It may be possible that God has something other than what you are currently doing in mind for you. But I can't help but wonder that if we won't live this life to the full, then why should God think up something more challenging for us? Within the same sea we are already swimming. We can leave the shallow end. We can still put out into deep water, let down our nets for a catch, and see what happens next. Whatever it is, you can bet that you have already been caught, or you wouldn't be sitting here right now listening to this. You have already been called, both to live and to magnify the abundant life of God. May it be so.